Hello, my name is Darren Graham, and I'm a solution architect for Software AG Government Solutions. I've been working on IT modernization projects for almost 2 decades, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about APIs, application programming interfaces, and share some secret ingredients that I've noticed are often part of successful modernization projects. So let's get to it. In my experience working with large federal and DoD agencies, I sometimes find myself in a situation that I call meeting purgatory. And I know you've been in these meetings before too, where you're trying to describe a scenario where an organization did something that enabled them to achieve success. But sometimes, no matter how impactful that story is, or how well it's told, or even how applicable it is to an organization, I've somehow ended up in purgatory. I'm in a room full of opinions about how that specific approach would never work in their organization. And this is what I mean by meeting purgatory. It's two sides talking past each other with no real common ground in sight. For example, in one meeting purgatory, I was telling a group about a really large agency that is heavily reliant on mainframes to power their organization, but they're still really good at modernizing their IT landscape. Of course, the hardware that we see here has been modernized over time, but much of the code and the logic that were built over the decades are still running today. The engineers within this agency were able to introduce an abstraction layer over the existing logic of the mainframe. And by implementing these new APIs, they were able to unlock these systems. This gave them the ability to keep and leverage the complex processing code base that had evolved over the decades. But it also gave them the agility to adopt new and modern languages, different skill sets and runtimes to help speed the evolution of their systems. One of the things they did differently became a key pivot point for their success. They focused on making the team members themselves more valuable. And they did this by coupling their API abstraction layer with meaningful programs to educate the younger software engineers to bolster their skills with the older legacy languages. And it quickly became apparent to the younger engineers, some of whom were just fresh out of school, and this is their first job, that being equipped with in-depth knowledge of these legacy systems made them extremely valuable to the agency and potentially valuable to other agencies as well. So for this agency and the folks within it, it was a win-win. And this is the first secret to IT modernization that I'll share with you. And that is, you've got to bridge the gap and connect the legacy world with the modern world. And this just isn't an architectural problem that's solved by technology with APIs or an abstraction layer. It's a people problem. And it's not a world-changing concept, but you cannot have two different teams, the as-is team and the to-be, and expect cohesive results. Bridging the gap provided the agency with a vast resource pool that allowed them to easily maintain and sustain the key legacy software that had been running for decades, but also taking advantage of these newer languages and runtimes at the same time. But back in my meeting purgatory, the benefits of bridging the gap was not getting anybody excited. In fact, I can remember one engineer who was far more vocal than anybody else, and I can picture his face. He was an older gentleman with these big blue eyes and this gigantic frown. And before I knew it, more and more participants of the meeting were chiming in and affirming his views. All they could talk about were the blockers within their organization that would prevent this kind of success. Now, I agree, certain challenges are problems for any effort, especially modernization. Things like skill sets, lack of management support, maybe absence of tooling, probably all of these, but their main focus was on the scale of the problem. They argued that their systems were so large and complex that modernization using an API-based approach would never work. They argued that it couldn't scale to satisfy the tempo of change in their organization. But they didn't have an alternative plan yet, so they weren't scaling anyway. And that leads me to another modernization secret that I suspect won't be a surprise for you. And that is, you have to start. It seems like a simple concept, but there's a reason we have phrases like analysis paralysis and perfect is the enemy of good. And as the Chinese proverb so eloquently puts it, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You start with one API on one interface, on one system. You'll never get to the top of the mountain unless you take the first step. And this reminds me of a story that the famous actor Will Smith told about his childhood. When he was about 12, His father assigned he and his younger brother a task to build a new brick wall for the front of their shop. And after months of tedious effort every day after school, the progress was very slow and discouraging. And Smith said to himself, "There'll be nothing but a giant hole here forever." But some 18 months later, he and his brother were able to stand back and marvel at this massive wall that they had completed together. And I believe this is a testament to starting with the first step. Now, when I was 12, instead of building a wall, I was learning to become a software engineer on my VIC-20. And my computer had a special expansion pack that my dad built that boosted the RAM to a whopping 32 kilobytes. And I thought there was nothing that I couldn't do. This computer would be able to carry me far into the future. So fast forward now, and let's take a look at how massive a shift that we see in home computing. We're talking about millions of a percent improvement at a fraction of the cost. My point is that technology, software, even people will continue to improve around you, sometimes at breakneck speed. And I believe organizations need to combine the evolutions of their systems along with the growth of their teams and push that into the underlying culture of the organization. And this brings me to the last secret that I'll share with you today. There are so many drivers that justify reasons for modernizing IT technology. Certainly cost is a primary factor. I could probably rattle off 3 or 4 secondary ones. But the secret is to be successful, organizations need to foster the will for change. Embracing something means to desire it. And when I think back to my meeting purgatory with my grumpy cat, it underscores my belief that this is a people problem. And in my experience, organizations that truly embrace the journey are the ones that can achieve repeatable success. So to quickly summarize, you need to bridge the gap. You need to cultivate a unified team and cross-train your resources. You also have to get started. Don't focus on the size of the problem. Rome wasn't built in a day. And you need to embrace the change. You need to foster a culture of evolution. Transformation can seem very powerful for teams who are successful. So that's the end of my talk today. I appreciate you listening. Have a great day.